Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Mitchell Feldmann about high-throughput techniques for reconstructing fruit form. Various research and breeding programs study phenotypic traits, or traits that can be discerned via the five senses, to evaluate the quality of their target crops. However, getting data on these traits, often via human-made measurements, can be time-consuming, subjective, and inaccurate, hampering research efforts. This episode, Mitchell discusses his work developing a high-throughput, affordable way to capture one important phenotypic trait, fruit shape. Don't forget to listen to the end of the show for our student spotlight. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but before we dive in, we wanted to thank our sponsors. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Mitchell Feldmann with us. Mitchell went to undergrad at University of Arizona, where he studied ecology and evolutionary biology and mathematics, and completed a research thesis with Dr. Noah Whiteman. He worked to study the genetics of plant resistance susceptibility to insect herbivores. He did his PhD research at University of California, Davis, under the guidance of Dr. Stephen Knapp, on quantitative genetics of octoploid strawberry and plant breeding. He also worked to solve several statistical issues in genetics and image-based phenotyping for fruit size, shape, color, and appearance. He spent a year at H.M. Klaus as a geneticist for both hot and sweet peppers. He is now a postdoc at UC Davis, working with Dr. Stephen Knapp on genomic prediction of disease resistance, fruit quality, and productivity, developing low-cost genotyping strategies for strawberry for routine evaluation in a breeding program, and investing in predictive breeding strategies that marry phenomics and genomics. Hi, Mitchell. How are you? How are you doing today?
Hi, Abby. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you and talk about this today. So we are talking about capturing fruit shapes for research today. So can you just give us some background about why it's important for researchers to be able to capture this information about their crops, what they use it for in their research, just kind of the importance of that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of an esoteric problem, fruit shape. I mean, we all interact with fruits on a hopefully daily basis or at least a weekly basis, and appearance is a critical component of how we pick out the fruit we want to buy. When you go to look at a clamshell of strawberries, you're pretty much looking for complete redness. You're not tasting the fruit, you're looking at them, right, entirely. So uniformity is of both shape and color is really important. So we were trying to basically go to the highest dimensionality that we could for fruit shape. A lot of studies are done in 2 dimensions, but obviously fruit exists in a 3D world. So trying to figure out how do we inexpensively capture that 3-dimensional information so that we know what is the most important types of measurements or variables that we can get was sort of the goal here. How do we go as big as we can so that we can use the information to come back to a smaller, very meaningful set of variables?
Sure. I got very excited when you said the highest dimension. I was like, the 4th dimension of fruit, because I'm goofy.
It's a great question, though, right? If you put a time axis on shape and you think about the development of fruit, when is the final shape determined? For a strawberry, if you've ever seen the flowers on modern cultivars, the receptacles are very large, and they look like little strawberries covered in reproductive tissue, and so they get pollinated. The receptacle responds to the pollinated seed and then begins to enlarge. So you're not eating botanical fruit when you're eating a strawberry. You're eating an accessory tissue called the receptacle. And so you could probably go look at measure fruit shape and fruit size in the absence of deformation on the completely unpollinated receptacle of a strawberry. Then, of course, if you're using our system, which we'll get into, you'd be destroying that potential fruit. So it's probably not the right way to go. But I think that's likely already determined, and it's probably determined way before then, right, in the development of that tissue, which our system, of course, wouldn't be able to capture because it's not an X-ray type system.
Sure. Yeah, I for like a throwaway comment that really went somewhere so interesting. Maybe some future research or a new system to develop. So you had several goals then in this project. So can you just go over some of what you were hoping to achieve in regards to this specific problem?
Yeah, so, where do I begin? I think the biggest challenge that we were trying to solve was access to sort of a technology, both physical hardware and a software sort of solution that was going to be openly available, so very inexpensive, made using all consumer grade parts, and fast. So fast, I would say, is the number one goal for this. When I look at other papers that have done similar type projects, sort of this lazy Susan style of photogrammetry, if you will, so measuring things from photos, you're often seeing measurements or image capture taking place over the course of a minute or minutes. And if you want to imagine going out to a strawberry field, like our seedling nursery that has 10,000 individual plants in it, and we might want to measure 5 fruit from maybe 2,000 of them. So we have 10,000 fruit. I can't be doing minutes unless I have an armada of these things available to me, and so we really were focused on as inexpensive as possible, something that you wouldn't even in a competitive grant really see in the budget relative to the indirect costs, and something that would allow you to capture the data on a time scale that doesn't feel like such a slog. And then at the end of that, right, we wanted our models, our 3-dimensional reconstructions of the fruit and of the different objects that we were imaging to be as accurate as possible, given the limitations of the hardware and sort of the fact that we were trying to just move it as quickly as we can. So there's probably a little bit of that, precision versus speed,
sure,
that you're giving up a little bit there, but I think it's probably okay.
Sure. Just to give a little extra context for people, how are these types of things normally measured? Because obviously, if you're measuring fruit that was, a square or a rectangle, you could just, height, width, depth. Obviously, something like strawberry is not going to have that. So could you just give us a little insight into how these measurements are normally taken, both in regards to like what actual measurements are taken, as well as, how physically that's actually done? Yeah.
So oddly enough, the strawberry is often just considered as a rectangle, and length and width are often the primary shape components that are measured, and then you take the aspect ratio of that, right, which is a dimensionless number that tells you how like a square is it, or how like a line is it, and depending on how you want to think about it. There have been groups that have then extended that to depth, like length. So you have the height of the fruit from tip to stem. You have the width at some rotation and the depth at, again, some rotation. And that's fine. I think that those are probably our primary descriptors of fruit shape. But obviously it's a huge reduction in the dimensionality of fruit shape. The other way that is common in sort of the research space is to use just a top-down 2D image, and then to do some sort of morphometric type of analysis to try to measure the shape, again, in more higher dimensions than just length and width, but you're still just capturing one two-dimensional projection of this three-dimensional thing. The other way, and the way that's probably most common in plant breeding applications, is a scale. So is it most like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 being something that hopefully is very different and very distinct than 1, or something that's just, are the fruit uniform, right? Are the fruit uniform, or are they, deformed constantly? Do they all look very different from each other? This kind of thing. So, right, fruit shape itself is not necessarily just the sort of the curvature on the surface of this object. It's also sort of how we interpret it, which I think is really challenging. And one of the challenges with the three-dimensional work, again, is turning that into something that I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm gonna let it happen, right? You have all of these data points on the surface of this model. How do I turn that into a single value that is meaningful to a breeder or a grower or somebody in a packing house or somebody in a distribution center, right? Where they can say, like, we really love fruit that have a shape value, a three-dimensional shape value of X, and everything else is suboptimal, right? And I don't really know how to even get to that aside from like asking people, like, what's your opinion of all of these different fruit? But, I tried that just locally on campus here at UC Davis, and people don't think that they care. That was what I got. So people, were really interested in not what it looked like, but what does it taste like? It's like, well, I'm not asking that. I'm asking you to tell me which ones you like to look at the most, so we can sort of help orient what's the directionality of superior versus inferior in the breeding context. So I think there's a ton of headway to make in that space to understand a good shape versus a bad shape. But often uniformity of shape is essential. So those are sort of the main ways. So it's length and width, 2D, and then these sort of categorical scores.
Okay. That is so interesting. And, part of why I asked about like the dimensions is because like some strawberries are they're like super wide. So yeah. It's like, well, where is it turned on its axis when you're taking those measurements and,
Totally.
Things like that. The other thing that sticks out to me is, it's interesting that you mentioned these scales, because I guess to me, I didn't think about the fact that it probably really depends on like what the end use of the fruit is too. Like obviously eating would be, but like some of them, if it's going into jam, it probably doesn't matter. Or like someone who's putting it on top of a cake probably wants a very specific kind of iconic strawberry shape, yeah. Whereas someone who's just eating it in their house might just want really big giant ones, or, so,
or not.
right, exactly. So it's interesting to think about that. And the analogy that came to mind, which this is maybe a little inside baseball here, is kind of when you take like a photo and you want to have as many pixels as possible, because then when you're manipulating it in your filters or whatever, you can make it darker or lighter. You can bring out details or not. But if it's washed out, and the data's just not there to start with, or if it's low resolution, like you can't, put on those filters, which seems like researchers are looking for, the data, enough data from the dimensionality and the shape that whatever filter they want to put on, it will still work. Is that fair? Is that a fair analogy?
I think that's perfectly fair. And just to sort of back that up, right? If your raw image is a JPEG, that's a lossy format, and you're never going to recover the information in between the pixels. And so if you start with a two-dimensional picture of a fruit, you're never going to recover the three-dimensionality of that fruit. And, that's where we're at. And yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Okay. I'm so pleased because I was so pleased with my cleverness in coming up with it. So I'm glad that it works.
I'll say one more thing sort of on that topic too, right? Because you had mentioned, right, some fruit are very wedge-shaped. They look like a wedge that would go under your door and like stop your door or something like that, right? They're wide on one face and they're really thin on the other face. Thinking about, again, that's putting them on a square or making them a rectangular, a cube. Which is wrong, right? Which face do you measure?
Right.
And that's the other thing that we really wanted to get away from is making assumptions or requiring people to make decisions about what is the face of the fruit. Because we don't know, if we think about sort of Dan Chitwood's work on leaf morphometrics in grapevines, there's leaves. Grape leaves have they're very variable in their shape, but they have very distinct points, known points of biological homology. I dare you to find a strawberry and just by looking at it, point out 1 or 5 biologically homologous points other than the stem, and that's it. Right? Even fruit from the same plant don't have the same number of achenes. They are a homologous tissue, but they're not in a homologous position. So I can't compare I can compare the distribution of achenes as long as I allow there to be, but not in the same, as long as I allow there to be different numbers of things in my comparison set, but not in the same way where I'm going to use that to align the fruit together because I don't have any fixed A, B, C, D points, except for the stem. So my entire rotation about the stem to tip axis is unknown. So it's ambiguous. And that's the challenge with, and I think the fun thing about strawberry, apples, pears, grapes, potatoes, is the rotation ambiguity. Some, like potatoes, probably have, much higher, several axes of rotation ambiguity. Luckily, with most of those other things, the blossom to stem end define one axis that you can fix.
Yeah. Show me the top of a potato, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And then just for our listeners, achenes are what most people would think of as like strawberry seeds, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Perfect. The next thing is now looking ahead to what you were trying to actually create as an alternative to kind of these various physical measurements that exist already. So I'm hoping first you can just give us a physical layout of the setup so that people have like a picture in mind. So how were you actually measuring your fruit?
Yeah, so I'll sort of design or define the hardware system, and then that will, I think, allow me to sort of describe that in a little bit more detail. So for the uninitiated listener who's never heard of 8020 T-slotted aluminum, it is square pieces of aluminum with slots on all 4 sides that are shaped like T's, where the horizontal bar of the T is inside of the aluminum bar. So that allows you to get these really nice different types of connector pieces and sort of build out. It literally feels like adult Legos. People say like, oh, building your own computer, that's adult Legos. No, 8020 T-slotted aluminum, that is adult Legos. So basically I have this 3 feet piece of T-slotted aluminum and another one of those. And so the first one is horizontal, and it's effectively on the tabletop. And the other one is vertical. So it's basically a boom arm coming off of that first one. There's a lot of other pieces for stability and stabilizing it. I thought it was going to be really stable just with like the most basic version of it, but it was not at all. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. The cameras are then mounted onto that vertical boom arm, facing all in the same direction. And then sort of on the other side of the horizontal T-slotted piece on the tabletop, there's a little stepper motor. And so stepper motors are used in all kinds of robotics and in all kinds of products where they're moving parts and, moving things. And basically they have a set number of steps or clicks around the rotation. And so each step is equal to approximately some angle from where it starts. And so you can really finely control the rate of these of motion using that. From that stepper motor, there was basically maybe a 1 foot piece of rod that I had attached to it, and then mounted sort of this spiked contraption onto the top of that. And so that piece would rotate with the stepper motor. So I would implant a strawberry stem down onto this sort of spiky, torture system, and then it would rotate about its stem axis on the stepper motor. And the cameras are looking right at it and would be firing for a set number of seconds using a product called a pocket wizard, which is effectively a remote control device for cameras. It's used a lot in sports and this type of photography where you have multiple remote light sources, flashes, and you can trigger all your camera and all of these things from a single button click. So that was the idea, was to be able to control all of the cameras from a single button click.
I love this. It sounds so sci-fi of stabbing the fruit on and your pocket wizard.
Yeah.
I love the idea. I love the name Pocket Wizard. It just sends my brain in all these different directions.
I have, and it's funny, each time you interact with them and they send you something, even if it's like a cable, you get stickers. So I've just got a small stack of Pocket Wizard stickers.
That's amazing.
They're kind of expensive. For this situation, you need two. You need a sender and a receiver, right? And so you have to buy two of the same product, and it can be in either send or receive mode. But that's how you can control it. This project got really out of hand for me, probably because it existed in my space for so long. And so I spent many hours just twiddling with things. I don't know if we want to go into this in detail, but at the end of all of my little mechanical experimentation, and I will, again, for the listeners, I am not an engineer. I have no electro engineering background or electronics background whatsoever, other than I like to play video games, right? So I'm just messing with stuff. So I shorted one of the Pocket Wizards and had jumper cables go into the GPIO of a Raspberry Pi, so that when I triggered a Python script from reading a barcode scanner, it would send an electrical signal through those pins, and by that trigger the Pocket Wizard that was plugged into it, which would then trigger the other cameras to start firing. So basically it became a system where I have one input, and it's a barcode scanner that reads the sample ID, prints it to a text file, and at the same time starts the motor and then starts the cameras. So I was really, really excited when that all worked out, because it didn't for a long time. There was no progress, right? It was just me being oh, this has to work, and trying to find solutions on Google, and then finally finding a different solution that I don't know if it's actually good for the electronics. Every time I do this, I might be this close to just shorting, completely frying one of these things. I have no idea.
Oh, no.
But I'm imagining that it's fine.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess you'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, when you say Raspberry Pi, do you mean an actual physical Pi, or is that a technology thing?
Yes, that's a technology. So
Okay.
Raspberry Pis are little microcomputers that run a really stripped down version of a Linux operating system. But effectively, you can use it to do a whole bunch of stuff. Control or get data from all kinds of different sensors that might be weather or control cameras. If you look up Malia Gahan's work, she's using PyCams, or was at one point using PyCams because they're very cheap. And these are little, really small cameras that are controlled by Raspberry Pis, and so you can program a little, system by which they are taking a photo every minute, every hour, whatever you want for extended period of time, and you don't have to be there, right? The computer is going to handle all that for you as long as it has power. Okay. The other thing that's used in the system that I didn't describe very well to control the stepper motor is an Arduino microcontroller. So microcontroller. Microcomputers, you can get in there, you can program, you can go on the internet, you can do whatever you want. It's a computer. The microcontroller is not a computer. You have to upload effectively software or code, a code base to it, and then it executes that singular code base. And your code base can get quite extensive depending on what you need it to do, so that if one sensor fires, it starts doing another thing. If that sensor stops firing, the other thing stops. So you can do quite a bit of complicated stuff. For me, I just wanted it to turn on the stepper motor for 9 seconds and then stop. And that was nice. It. So it was, again, all of this, like if you were to look at it, and I think most of what you need is in the supplemental information for this paper, it probably looks like a child wrote it. And I'm fine with that. It worked.
Okay. Yeah, there's so much there. And thank you for being gracious enough to accept my Raspberry Pi question. I didn't know if it was like a potato clock thing where it was just like getting energy from the sugars. I don't know. Also not an engineer or scientist in any way, shape, or form. So, but I do love that this project seems to really just kind of capture the spirit of science of just being like, let's try a thing and see if it works.
Yeah. And on that note, I was really enabled, right, by Steve to sort of explore this and do this, and I wasn't ridiculed for not having anything, like nothing to demonstrate for years, and still being just kind of whimsically excited about the whole idea of it. And even now talking about it with you is really a gift, because I don't work on this particular project at all anymore. And so thinking about it and remembering the time that I spent, somebody might call that wasted time. Obviously it isn't, because I had so much fun doing it, and I think it was great for my mental health and sort of just the ease of lessening other types of research tensions that were happening and that will happen during grad school, right? It was something that I could work on with my hands that didn't require me to be out in the field, or writing R code or writing papers or whatever. It was something that was totally mine, and was a very different type of research experience that was very fulfilling.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's wonderful. Yeah, whimsically excited. I feel like that's like my default mode of existence sometimes. So I'm very pleased. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Mitchell's paper, Cost-Effective High-Throughput Phenotyping System for 3D Reconstruction of Fruit Form, published in the Plant Phenome Journal, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Thanks again also to our sponsors. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. Moving on then, you were getting these measurements then from two different kinds of objects. So some of them were like real, the actual fruit, and some of them were not. So can you tell us a little bit about what you were measuring and how that went?
Yeah, so we knew we wanted to measure fruit. I work on strawberry and have for 6 of the last 7 years. Amy Tabb, Dr. Amy Tabb, I should say, the co-author on this paper and close friend and mentor, is the other is at the Agricultural Fruit Research Station, so AFRS, part of the USDA in Kearneysville. And so she also works on fruit, or she works on fruit trees. And so it's like, yeah, okay, duh, we're going to be measuring fruit. So strawberries were one of them. We did mini peppers, so sweet mini peppers, sort of the snack peppers. Grapes, we did potatoes, we did some pears, we did some apples. At one point I had done a whole bunch of lemons. I was just going to Trader Joe's on my way in. So Trader Joe's is a supermarket chain. I don't know if it's everywhere in the United States, probably not. And I would just pick up fruit, take it in, scan some of it, and send that data to Amy. The other type of, and so obviously there, basically we're trying to understand, can we make models that look like the fruit that we were imaging? That was the goal. I did not want to sit there and hand measure length, width, depth on a bunch of lemons or on a bunch of strawberries because of the exact point you brought up earlier, right? If I'm looking at an ambiguously oriented object and I take a pair of calipers and I measure it, how do I know when I go to digitally measure that I'm hitting the same 2 points? I'm not. I know I'm not. There's almost zero chance that I'm actually doing that in exactly the same way. And so that to me is problematic because then I don't, right? The hand measurement isn't a ground truth because it's comparable, but it's not equivalent. And so we wanted to have a system in place that we could really ground truth this system and not, again, getting away from the, what does my machine say? What does my eye say? Or what does my hand measurement say? Because both of those have error, right? But neither of those are perfect. And so we went to this website, this wonderful website. It is a gift to the universe called Thingiverse. It is the universe of things. And it is a resource for 3-dimensional printing, basically, and resources for 3D printing. So you can go on and download all kinds of 3-dimensional models, modify them, and then print them at your own will if you have a 3D printer. I don't have a 3D printer, but the USDA has a 3D printer. And so the machine shop that is at the same station as Amy was able to print a bunch of different models for us. So we had like a sphere, a bunch of dice, this weird thing that was like an F with a little angular thing off the back, and a couple other objects. And we were trying to choose objects that were fruit-like, so spheres and this sort of it was sort of like a pyramid, like a tetrahedron type shape that had curved edges. And then these other things, and so basically you have a sharp edge, but with curvature. There's no occlusions, so there's nothing that at any rotation the surface is hidden, right? So with a strawberry, you might have a deformation where there is a crevice in the fruit that if you're looking at it, you know that's there because you have 2 eyes and you can do the depth perception. But if you rotate it away, you won't see it. And when you're looking straight at it with 1 eye, you can't see it. You can't tell that it's a crevice and that there's differential depth there. And so we wanted to have all those types of challenging features embedded into the types of ground truth objects. So we could be like, it's a digital camera. Like it's a 2D digital camera. It's not a stereo pair. It's one camera. We knew going in that we weren't going to be able to do these types of large occlusions. And then the other part is we really wanted to be able to do sharp edges. Not because like sharp edges are really important. But because we wanted to be able to do smooth things, we wanted to be able to show that, like, hey, at this junction, this very tight junction, we are able to capture that pretty well. And so that was the idea. So we printed out a bunch of these things, a bunch of these objects from Thingiverse at different sizes. So we have, like, the 1-inch sphere, the 2-inch sphere, the 3-inch sphere, and the 4-inch sphere. It's like, well, which one do we do the best? Which one do we do the worst on? Or is there a gradient at all? And so that was sort of the idea behind that set of things, was to have a true digital model that we downloaded and then modified and scaled. It then goes through the printing process. There is some error baked into the printing of this thing. And then we scan it or image it, and then we reconstruct the model. So if we can do that whole slew of things where we're printing it, scanning it, and reconstructing it, and still get very small errors, we're doing pretty good.
Nice. And what did you find from all of your different scans?
So we're doing pretty good.
Good.
We can't do occlusions. So the dice that we had, each face of them, I had multi-sided dice, so 6, 4, or 6, I can't remember, 12, something else. And all of these had large sort of pitted cutaways. And so you could, as you're looking at it, you can see the perfect outline of this dice in our model, but you can't tell what is on the face because it's cut away. Everything else, those were the worst ones, and mostly those errors are in the volume estimate and the surface area estimates. The other thing that we found, actually, is that the surface area estimates from our approach are not great. But think about this, right? We are using voxels. So voxels are 3-dimensional pixels. It's a cube in space instead of a square on a plane. So all of our boundaries between object and not object are sharp. Very sharp, right? Very pointy, with square edges constantly, just concentric square edges. And that's a lot more surface area than if it's just smooth. And so the original 3D models that we downloaded and printed are smooth. And then the reconstruction strategy that we had was to create voxels, which are not smooth. And so the surface area is, it's not good. But the volume is really good, and the other, sort of the length, width, and depth of the principal axes, the 3 principal axes, so length, width, and depth are those principal axes, are quite good millimeters of variability. So we're pretty happy with that. Yeah,
that sounds wonderful. Well, congratulations. I'm glad that I'm going to just go for it and say it was so fruitful. So I was like, there's not a better, easier way to avoid it. So I'll just go for it. So yeah. Obviously some of what we've already discussed will pretty easily lead into this, but where is like the future research for, obviously so you're not working on this particular project anymore, but, similar projects, like what's, up and coming?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I have some exciting news that will come out in the Twitterverse and out into the ether in about a month or so. And this is hopefully something that can sort of be approached a little bit more vigorously at that point or in subsequent years. But strawberry shape, right? Or fruit shape in general, but I'll say strawberry shape because I think about strawberries like 100% of the time. It's not a bad thing to think about, honestly. So there's the appearance piece for consumers. So that's something that's really interesting. So taking these models and being able to develop models on fruit that are real and are part of our breeding program, and understanding what do people like, how do we prefer that, or what's preferred? Is there any preference there? Extending that to, what about color uniformity? We didn't try to texture these models at all in this paper. That's something we've well, that could be a downstream thing. Let's just try to get this out. We, between the two of us, me and Davis and Amy in West Virginia, have been working on this for 2.5 years. So we're just let's wrap it here and do that and then move on. And so I think texturing these models, so applying color to the models, is really important. And because then we could do shape uniformity and color uniformity in one fruit, but also across fruit from that plant or from that plot or whatever. So that's really something that's very interesting to me. The other parts of this that I'm excited about is sort of strawberry. 90% of the fresh produce for strawberry is produced in California. And all of that, 100% of it, except for what goes to local markets, very local markets, in that the fruit are already overripe, quote unquote overripe, and they're going to go to the farmer's market that day. Everything else goes into cold storage for a couple days and then transit. And so the fruit that you're getting in, Abby, I don't know actually where you're located.
We're in Madison, Wisconsin.
In Madison, Wisconsin, it sat in cold storage for several days, and then it sat on a refrigerated truck for several days. That's a lot of time for somebody or something to shake vigorously the clamshell and cause secondary damage, during shipment. So one of the ways that I'm trying to think about this is, how do we solve one of these more physical problems, and how do we design a strawberry that packs better into its clamshell? That way, when this vigorous shaking occurs, there aren't weird points or weird edges sort of bouncing into each other and causing damage, but everything's sort of flush and safe and secure. You can think about it like going to the supermarket and the way that they have, cans of soda or soup cans or different types of fruit, stacked up in that sort of trapezoid. How do you do that inside of a clamshell for that pound of strawberries or 2 pounds of strawberries? And what's the best strawberry to minimize the potential to take damage during shipment? And then, of course, right, is that shape? The answer is a square. The answer is always a square. The square is the best. But given that I've never seen a square strawberry, in, again, 7 years of working with strawberries, what is the iconic strawberry shape, or the thing that's closest to that iconic strawberry shape that people in their mind think when you say a strawberry, that also has those minimizing features? So what's the thing that a consumer wants to think is a strawberry and thinks is a strawberry that packs well? That packs really well. So it's uniformity and shape and these kinds of things. You could also imagine that, actually, maybe if you haven't thought about strawberries for as long as I have, the challenge of the next probably 10 years in strawberry and in California in general in agriculture is probably going to be labor. Strawberries are 100%, nearly 100% handpicked. And by nearly, I mean 99.9% of the acres are handpicked. That's probably not going to be sustainable going forward. I mean, it's hard work and the labor force is aging. Young people don't want to come to the United States to do that work, and for good reason. I don't either. So robotic harvesting and automated harvesting is going to need to improve. And there's a lot of cool companies doing good stuff, doing really nice work in this space. But one of the challenges is going to be, how does the robot learn how to interact with a three-dimensional fruit and not damage it, to find it and not damage it during harvest? And there's a lot of ways you could imagine doing that, but this system could be, again, a high-throughput way to produce digital assets for companies like that who want to have access to real textured 3D reconstructions of fruit that then can be interacted with by a machine learning algorithm to understand, what do I need to do to sort of manipulate this fruit and look at it and understand it, right?
Wow, that's amazing. Obviously, a ton of really interesting research coming up. Yay, that's very exciting. And a plug to follow Mitchell on Twitter. Perhaps by the time this posts, the news will already be out, and you can go find it.
Yeah, it could be
right now.
So we're recording on September 30th.
Yep. Future people, be aware. So I've got 3 questions left for you. The first one is, if listeners want to learn more about anything we've talked about today, where can they go?
So you can go to the Plant Phenome Journal. There's an article authored by myself and Dr. Tab that describes this whole sort of experiment in great detail. You can email me at mjfeldman@ucdavis.edu. I'm sure you could email Amy, but I won't give her email address because I didn't ask her if that was okay. You're free to contact me with questions about what has been done or opportunities to do stuff in the future. I'm on Twitter at Mitch Feldmann. DM me, email me.
Yeah, we'll include links to all of that in the show notes. That'll be perfect. Next question is, if people then want to take that next step and get involved with this research or these kinds of research, what can they do? Or consumers, what can they do?
Yeah, so getting involved in this kind of research, again, reach out, especially if you have ideas on how you might. Again, we're sort of on a hiatus with the fruit shape endeavors, but we are always excited for collaborative and sort of civilian science opportunities or civic science opportunities. So if you have opinions about fruit shape, and I will be taking note on the number of people that reach out to me and talk about fruit size. Fruit size is not fruit shape. I would love to hear your opinions because I have struggled, even amongst, the scientists at UC Davis, to get even a sense that people have an opinion about shape, even though it's one of the key things that you're looking at when you're looking at a strawberry. So, reach out. Let's have a conversation. If you have an idea, feel free to propose it. If you want to work on something like this in a scientific way, I'm sure we can figure something out, although I'm not entirely sure what that will 100% look like.
Sure. All right. And then what is one fun fact that listeners would not know about you if all they had was your research?
I am a musician. So I've been playing music since I was 12 years old. Grew up listening to thrash metal and sort of the new wave of British heavy metal, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Sepultura, bands like this. And now I write and create music, and it's on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Vug, VUG_01. There is another artist who plays piano by the name of Vug. And it's kind of soundtrack metal, I guess. It's all instrumental. It's just me noodling mostly. Yeah, I like the name because it's geodes, right? A sealed geode has an air cavity, or maybe there's liquid in there or something. The hollow space inside of a geode is a Vug. And I love that.
I'm so pleased.
That's where the name came from. Yeah.
Cool.
That's me.
Oh man, I learned so many new things today. Was not expecting to learn that. So even better. Whimsical excitement abounds. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you taking time away from your research and projects to talk with us and share this super cool project. We'll include links to all of those things, Thingiverse, the things you mentioned. We can put a plug in for your SoundCloud in there. Get it all down. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, Abby. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Jagdeep. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you're studying?
Thanks, Abby, for having me here. My name is Jagdeep Singh, and I did my undergrad from Punjab Agriculture University, Punjab, India. And then I came to New Mexico State University, where I did my master's focusing on irrigation management in guar, also known as cluster bean, and I'm currently doing PhD at Auburn University, focusing on cotton and soybean.
Wonderful. And what are you currently researching?
My PhD revolves around understanding root architecture development and its role in nutrient uptake. One of the main projects of my PhD is trying to understand how the nutrient uptake and partitioning in cotton have changed over the past 70 years. And I'm also trying to understand how cotton's root architecture and growth were affected during that period. This work is important to find what cotton crop characteristics have not been improved over the past decades and how those characteristics can help improve cotton yield in the future.
Wonderful. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that look like?
That's a little bit difficult to answer, but if I get to choose a dream project, that most likely would have a collaborative team of different researchers where I can do my part in improving the crop below ground, the roots, and the other researchers can improve the above ground at the same time so that eventually we develop cultivars which are more resilient and adaptable and thereby helping everyone to have sustainable agriculture.
Awesome. If you'd like to get in touch with Jagdeep about his work, we'll have his contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.